He ran, stumbling over roots and crashing through wet undergrowth. His breath hitched, but he didn't stop. Somewhere ahead, in the inky darkness of the night's deep woods, a cry echoed, a child's cry, frightened, hoarse from weeping. Gregory could barely see the trail, only feeling his way through the thickets. Branches slapped his face, tearing at his jacket. His heart pounded in his chest, not from exhaustion, but from dread. He distinctly heard a child's voice. Here, in the wilderness, 100 miles from the nearest town. It was unheard of. Before we begin, tell us where you're from, subscribe, like, and watch to the end. Here we go. The cry came again, closer, sharper. Gregory flinched. For a moment he imagined it was his own son crying, calling for help just as plaintively that night. No, don't think about it. Not now. He forced himself to push away the terrifying memories. Now, another child, real, alive. He needed help. The wilderness held no mercy for the weak and alone. Just a few more steps forward, blindly, and Gregory burst out into a small clearing. Moonlight pierced through the tops of the towering pines, enough to make out the scene. In the middle of the clearing stood a boy, about 5 or 6 years old, completely alone. He was crying, sobbing, his head tipped back as if searching for someone. The boy wore only a light jacket. Nearby lay a small hat with a pom-pom. The child trembled from the cold, or fear, or perhaps both. Dark shadows crept along the edges of the clearing. Gregory understood immediately. Wolves. A pair of yellow eyes gleamed between the tree trunks. The predators moved silently, forming a semicircle encircling their prey. To them, a child was an easy target. Gregory had a rifle at his hip, but shooting in the dark was risky. A bullet could ricochet, and there might be an entire pack of wolves. He slowly fumbled in his pocket with his free hand for a lighter. In his other hand, he already clutched a thick, gnarled stick he'd grabbed while running. A step forward, another step. He emerged from the shadows of the trees, revealing himself. The wolves snarled low, a warning. The boy saw the man, fell silent for a moment, his eyes wide. "Don't be scared," Gregory rasped, trying to make his voice sound steady. "I'm with you." He tore off his backpack and pulled a crumpled rag, an old handkerchief, from a side pocket. He lit it with the lighter. The fabric flared brightly, the blazing torch illuminating Gregory's rugged face and the boy's frightened little face. The wolves recoiled, disliking fire. Brandishing the fiery handkerchief, Gregory yelled loudly and charged forward. The wolves howled. One, the boldest, sprang forward, but a hot lick of flame scorched its snout. The beast whimpered and leaped back, melting into the night. The others dissolved among the trees, unwilling to tangle with fire and a human. The clearing fell silent again, only the crackling of the smoldering handkerchief on the ground and the child's ragged breathing audible. Gregory tossed the charred handkerchief and rushed to the boy. He stood frozen, wide-eyed, looking first at the dying flame, then at the unfamiliar man before him. "Are you okay?" Gregory knelt, trying not to intimidate the boy with his height. He gently touched his shoulder. The boy flinched, but didn't run. He just sobbed again and barely whispered, "Mommy, where's Mommy?" It was as if a knife had pierced Gregory's heart. The child's voice trembled with despair. He looked around. No one, only the dark forest and the rustling sounds of the night. "I don't know, little one," he said softly, as gently as he could. "I found you here alone. Did you get lost?" The child looked up at him, eyes full of tears. His cheeks were scratched, his forehead smeared with dirt. But otherwise, he seemed unharmed. The boy tried to speak through convulsive sobs. "We were driving. Then bang! I woke up. Dark. Called for Mommy. She didn't come." He burst into tears again, remembering the ordeal. Gregory carefully pulled the boy to him, embracing him. At first, the child tensed, but the warmth of strong arms was soothing. A minute later, the boy buried his tear-streaked face in the man's shoulder. "Shh, shh. Everything will be all right," Gregory whispered, stroking the boy's back. Though he didn't know what all right meant now, but he just wanted to say it, as if to talk away the trouble. They needed to leave. The wolves might return, reinforced, and the boy, it seemed, was already exhausted. Gregory bent down, lifting the light body into his arms. The boy instinctively wrapped his arms around Gregory's neck, clinging close. "What's your name?" Gregory asked, straightening with the child in his arms. Ian," he whispered. "All right, Ian. You can call me Uncle Greg, okay? I'll take you somewhere warm." The boy nodded, resting his head on Gregory's shoulder. Complete exhaustion seemed to have overtaken the child. He went limp in the man's arms. Gregory bent down, picked up the child's abandoned hat from the clearing, and pulled it onto the boy's head. The cold night air could quickly chill him. Gregory was in a warm jacket, but the boy had little more than his thin coat. He unzipped his jacket and wrapped the boy in its folds, holding him close to his chest. "Hold tight," he said softly, and strode back into the thicket, the way he had come. Now he walked more carefully, not running, so as not to jostle the child. His eyes gradually adjusted to the darkness, and the moon peeked out from behind the clouds now and then, silvering their path. Gregory knew every trail, every outcrop here. His shelter was nearby. He had heard the cry not too far from his cabin, perhaps a mile, no more. The boy in his arms whimpered softly in his sleep or semi-consciousness. Gregory felt him trembling all over and hugged him tighter, trying to share his warmth. "How did you end up here, poor little one?" he thought, walking through the night forest. Ian said something about driving and bang. Sounds like an accident, but there were no roads here, except maybe an old logging track about 5 miles away. Or a plane? But there were no regular flights here. Maybe a private plane? His mind raced with questions. He glanced ahead, then at the boy's tired face against his chest. In the moonlight, it seemed pale, translucent, just like Tim's on the last day of his illness. Gregory shook his head, chasing the thought away. Not Tim. Not now. After about 20 minutes of walking among the dark trunks, a faint yellow patch appeared ahead, the window of his cabin. Gregory sighed with relief. They would make it. It would be safe there. He pushed open the creaking door with his shoulder, stepped inside, and immediately secured the heavy bolt. It was dim. The fire had long gone out, cold and damp, but he had kindling and birch bark stored away. Without releasing the boy, Gregory knelt by the fireplace, threw on some birch bark and dry splinters, and struck a match. Tongues of flame eagerly licked the bark, catching. Soon the small kindling crackled in the fire. The stove was lit. After placing a couple of logs on top, he finally gently seated Ian on his bunk, covered with an old deer hide. The boy was nearly unconscious and didn't resist. He only groaned softly when Gregory slipped off his muddy sneakers and felt his legs for dislocations. He seemed fine. "It's all right. You're home," Gregory mumbled, not even realizing he said home. The little one quieted, curled up on the hide. Gregory quickly draped his sleeping bag over him, tucking him up to his chin. The heat from the stove hadn't reached them yet, and the boy was icy. He needed warming up. He sprang up, took a metal mug from the shelf, and poured water from a jerry can. Heat it up. Give him warm water to drink. Broth would be better, but no time for that now. While the mug heated on the stove, Gregory threw more wood into the fire, let it burn brighter. Light spilled into the small cabin, a roughly built table, a stool, shelves with simple belongings. In the midst of it all, on the bunk, lay the child found in the woods, like a vision. Unbelievable, Gregory thought. A little angel in the heart of the wilderness. And if I hadn't gone out when he cried, if I hadn't made it in time. He squeezed his eyes shut, chasing away the dreadful image. The wolves would have closed in, pounced. No, he made it. He made it. The mug began to boil, the water hissing. Gregory wet a clean rag, cooled it to lukewarm, and carefully wiped the dirt from the boy's face. Beneath the soot and grime, a pinkish child's face emerged, the scratches superficial. Thank goodness he was unharmed. Ian stirred, opening his eyes. They gleamed in the dim light. "Mommy," he whispered again. "Shh! Hush!" Gregory sat beside him, holding his shoulder. "You're safe. Sleep, little one." The boy blinked, looking alternately at the dying candle stub left on the table and the flames in the stove. He seemed to barely understand where he was. Better still, let him sleep. Gregory sat on the stool by the bunk, still holding the small hand that convulsively gripped the edge of the bag. Gradually, the child's breathing evened out, and he drifted into sleep, occasionally sniffling. Only then did Gregory allow himself to exhale and run a hand over his face. What had just happened seemed unreal. He had lived as a recluse for several years, seeing no one, and now here he was, a tiny human sleeping in his bed, and not just a little human, a boy, the same age as— Don't think about it now. But the thoughts came anyway. In the swirling flames of the stove, he saw the outlines of that terrible night fire. There was fire then, too, and he held the body of a child in his arms, his own child. Gregory squeezed his eyes shut, clenching his teeth. Breathe, just breathe. In his ears, he seemed to hear that distant cry again. Tim's cry. Ian in the clearing cried almost the same way. Why was the past catching up with him again now? Was fate determined to finally break him? He stood, trying to shake off the apparition, and went to the window. Outside the thick glass, the night forest was black. Out there, hungry wolves still roamed. But in here, warmth, light, and a sleeping child who trusted him. Gregory rested his forehead against the cold glass. Once, long ago, his home was also full of warmth and trust. Once, he too was the father of a little boy. He involuntarily turned and looked at Ian. In the muted light, the child's face seemed serene. Long eyelashes cast shadows on his cheeks. Gregory's heart clenched with tenderness and sharp pain all at once. How many years had it been since he saw his son? Gregory shut his eyes. It was unbearable to imagine how Tim would have grown, if he were alive. But now, fate had thrown another child to him, as if offering a chance to glimpse what was lost. No, he thought, this isn't Tim. Ian is different. He needs my help now, not my tears. He took a deep breath, trying to rein in the surging emotions. He walked back to the bunk, sat on the edge, gently adjusted the displaced blanket over the boy's thin shoulder. The boy mumbled something incoherent in his sleep, and seemed to try to reach for the warmth. Without waking, Ian scooted closer and pressed his forehead into Gregory's knee. The man froze. This gesture of trust and helplessness burned within him. A lump rose in his throat. He carefully placed his hand on the boy's soft, light hair. "Sleep, little one," Gregory whispered barely audibly, not even noticing the affectionate word. "I'm here." Tears welled up in his eyes. He sat there for a long time until the pain of the past receded, replaced by a quiet resolve. Tomorrow morning he would need to figure out where Ian came from, where his parents were. If there was an accident, perhaps they needed help, or it was too late to help. No, he would think about that in the morning, too. For now, the main thing was that the child was alive, and he would do everything to keep it that way. Gregory must have dozed off right there by the bed. He woke to a faint touch. Ian, now awake, timidly tugged at his sleeve. "Uncle Greg," the boy called softly. The man raised his head. Outside the window, dawn was still gray. Inside the cabin it was dim, only embers glowing in the stove. He rubbed his stiff neck and immediately leaned down to the child. "I'm here," he said gently. "How are you?" The boy sat up, emerging from the sleeping bag. He seemed to have warmed up and rested during the night. His eyes were still puffy from tears, but held a lively curiosity and wariness. "Is this is a home?" he asked shyly, looking around. "My home." Gregory nodded. "Small, but it's enough for us. Are you cold? Do you want a drink?" Ian nodded. Gregory helped him down to the floor. The boy stood barefoot on the wooden planks, clutching Gregory's sleeve, afraid to let go. "Let's find you some socks, and we'll dry your shoes," Gregory mumbled, moving to the shelf. He rummaged among his meager belongings. He only had one pair of winter boots and one pair of sneakers, but there were old wool socks on the shelf. He found them, pulled the warm socks onto the boy's small feet. They slid down slightly. Ian thanked him with a quiet look. "My mommy knitted socks like these for me," he suddenly said, looking at the socks. Gregory froze for a moment. He suppressed a wince of pain. Instead, he asked softly, "Your mommy knitted socks for you? That means she cared that you didn't get cold. Good for mommy." At the mention of his mother, the boy's face clouded over. He pressed his lips together. Gregory quickly tried to distract him. "Here, drink some water." He offered the mug of water. The child eagerly took several sips. Then he asked with a trembling voice, "Will we go to Mommy? She's there. She stayed there." Gregory met Ian's gaze and understood. The boy remembered everything, remembered leaving his mother and running to find help. But he hoped that now Uncle Greg would take him back and everything would be all right. How could he tell him the truth? And should he tell him now, when they didn't even know what truth awaited them? "Listen, Ian," he began carefully. "Do you remember what happened?" The boy lowered his eyes, nodded. "The car crashed, hard. I hit my head. Then I woke up and Mommy was sleeping and wouldn't wake up. I called her, tugged at her, but she didn't get up." His voice broke. "Didn't see Daddy. He wasn't there. Then I went out, looked for someone, screamed." He fell silent, his breathing quickening. The memories were too fresh. Gregory gently put his arms around the boy's shoulders, squatting beside him. "You were so brave not to panic and to go for help," he said. "I heard you and found you, and now we'll find your mom and dad together, okay?" Ian looked up at him full of hope. "We'll find them? And you'll help them?" "I'll try." Gregory replied evasively, looking away. He couldn't tell the child now that, most likely, help was no longer needed. But what if, by some miracle, his mother was alive? Injured, unconscious, but alive? Hope flickered, though Gregory braced himself for the worst. "Morning will truly break soon, and we'll go," he said, standing up. "But first, how about I feed you, huh?" Distracted by the prospect of breakfast, the boy brightened a little. His stomach, it seemed, was empty. Gregory remembered he had some leftover venison stew from yesterday. It was cold, but he could reheat it. He scooped water from a barrel into a cast-iron pot with the thickened stew, then hung it over the fire. While the food warmed, he quickly checked the boy's shoes. His sneakers had dried by the stove, though they were battered. They'd do. Ian, meanwhile, examined the cabin's interior. He touched the patterns on a birch-bark bread-keeper, looked at the hunting gear in the corner. His eyes sparkled with curiosity, like any child's, despite the horror he had experienced. "Do you live here alone?" he asked suddenly. "Alone?" Gregory nodded, stirring the stew. "Where's your family?" Gregory's hand paused for a moment, but the boy asked innocently, without any malice. He couldn't know what wound he was reopening. "I don't have a family," Gregory replied softly. "Come on, sit down, it's ready." He placed a bowl of warm stew on the table, sat the boy on the stool, found a clean spoon. Ian eagerly began to eat, swallowing a couple of spoonfuls, then looked at Gregory self-consciously. "What about you?" "I'll eat later," the man smiled. "Eat up. Don't be shy, Ian." The boy, given permission, returned to his meal. Gregory watched him carefully hold the spoon, striving not to spill. Well-mannered, clearly. "Thank you," Ian said quietly, finishing the stew completely. He even wiped his mouth with his sleeve, then caught himself and looked guilty. "It's all right." Gregory patted his head. "Good job." The fed child immediately saw the world more clearly and kindly. He even smiled faintly, but as soon as his gaze fell on the door, anxiety clouded his face again. "Shall we go now?" he asked almost in a whisper. "We will," Gregory answered firmly. He handed Ian a small backpack, a child's one from long ago, lying unused. He put a bottle of water, a piece of flatbread, and a candy bar from his supplies inside. He draped his old jacket over the boy's shoulders. Ian was swallowed by it, but at least he wouldn't freeze. The sleeves were rolled up, the hem almost to his knees. Gregory quickly packed his own backpack, rope, knife, matches, a first aid kit. He had spent days in the wilderness many times, knowing what might be useful. Now he felt the journey ahead would be difficult. Before leaving, he carefully studied the map hanging on the wall, an old geological map of the area. Here was their camp, the schematic square of the cabin. About 5 miles southwest, an old logging road was marked. Perhaps the accident happened there. Ian stood beside him, also looking at the map, though he probably didn't understand it. "Well, ready?" Gregory asked, lowering the map. The boy nodded seriously. "Then let's go. Stay close, okay?" He slid open the bolt and opened the door. The morning greeted them with coolness and silence. A gray sky above the tops of the pines promised a cloudy day. A light mist lay across the ground. Gregory carefully scanned the surroundings. The wolves were clearly gone, but still quiet, only drops falling from the branches. He took the boy's hand, and they moved from the threshold into the thickets of ferns and rhododendrons, toward where a faint trail should lead to the logging road. At first, Ian held his rescuer's hand tightly and obediently walked beside him. But the forest, it seemed, no longer frightened him as much, especially in daylight. The boy peered around, at the tall fir trees, at the bright red toadstools beneath them, at a squirrel that darted up a trunk and vanished into the branches. Sometimes he asked questions in a quiet voice. Who was crying last night? Wolves, Gregory answered. They won't bite us, will they? No, they're not around now. Or, where did you get that scar? His small finger tracing an old scar on Gregory's hand. That was a long time ago. A bear scratched me. A real bear? Yep, but we made up. Gregory chuckled, not wanting to scare him with the full truth. Gradually, the boy warmed up, stepping with less uncertainty. He even let go of his hand sometimes, if he wanted to touch an interesting leaf or stroke moss on a rock. Gregory didn't rush him. He understood. They needed to get there. But the child's strength wasn't endless. Let him go at his own pace. The main thing was to keep their direction. After a couple of hours of wandering through the woods, he finally found signs of the old logging track. Logging had once been done here. A strip of young growth, overgrown with bushes, lay between the trees. In places, rotten tree stumps were visible, and although there wasn't much of a path left, walking alongside the track was easier than pushing through the dense forest. The sun was already high, but hidden behind gray clouds. The forest around them was utterly silent. Only once, in the distance, a woodpecker drummed, and a grouse flew up from underfoot. Gregory noticed that Ian was beginning to droop and shuffle his feet. He was tired. It was time for a break. He spotted a fallen log in a relatively dry spot. "Let's rest a bit, grab a snack," he suggested. The boy didn't object. Gregory sat him on the log, took his canteen of water from his backpack, and offered him a drink. He took a sip himself. He broke the flatbread in half, offering a piece to Ian. They chewed in silence for a while. Gregory wondered how far they still had to go to the accident site. So far, no obvious traces. Perhaps they hadn't reached it yet, or they had turned slightly off course. But Ian, he remembered, said, "I went out." Maybe he had made his way onto the logging road and followed it. Then, most likely, they were on the right path. "Look!" the boy suddenly called out quietly, pointing somewhere ahead. The branches of the bushes ahead rustled and parted. A small creature darted out onto the logging track, a chipmunk. It froze, standing upright, looking at its visitors with striped cheeks. It held something in its paws. Ian gasped with delight. Of course, a real chipmunk right in front of him, like in a cartoon. The boy even stood up to get a better look. "Don't make a sound," Gregory smiled, "or it'll run away." They watched as the chipmunk, assured that the humans weren't moving, calmly crossed the track and disappeared into the grass. "Wow," Ian whispered. For the first time, a look of pure childlike happiness, however fleeting, appeared on his face. Gregory felt a strange joy, as if he had managed to delight his own son. He remembered once showing Tim a baby squirrel in the yard, and Tim beamed with the same delight. The memory brought both warmth and pain, but it was easier now than before. For the first time in a long time, Gregory didn't immediately chase away the image of his son, but allowed it to simply be, like a benevolent ghost nearby. "I haven't forgotten you," he thought, addressing Tim mentally, "but I need every ounce of strength now to save another little one." The break was over. He patted Ian's back. "Let's keep going, buddy." The boy obediently slid off the log. Less than half an hour later, The smell in the air changed, a whiff of burning. Gregory stopped. Yes, the distinct smell of smoke and gasoline. His heart sank. Ahead was what remained of the car. "Smell that?" he asked quietly. Ian also stopped, sniffing, and immediately wilted. Yes, that's what it smelled like. "Stay close, okay?" Gregory said seriously. The boy came closer, clutching Gregory's hand again. They walked together toward the smell. The track sloped downwards, and soon their eyes saw mangled metal among the trees. Gregory felt uneasy, but he tried not to show it. Before them, in a hollow, lay a wrecked vehicle. A small SUV flipped onto its roof. The body was crushed, one wheel missing. Apparently it had flown off on impact. Around it lay shattered headlights, glass fragments, and various items ejected from the cabin. Fuel dripped in a thin stream from the punctured gas tank, hence the smell. Ian stood frozen, staring down. His lips trembled. "Mommy's there," he whispered. "And Daddy." Gregory placed a hand on his shoulder. "Wait here, okay? I'll go down and check." The boy inhaled convulsively, as if about to cry, but wiped his nose with his sleeve and nodded. He sat on the ground, hugging his knees. Gregory slowly descended the slope to the car. His heart pounded heavily. He had seen many terrible things in his life, but now he feared what he would find inside more than anything. Approaching the crumpled door, he peered into the broken window. The cabin was dark, smelling of blood and gasoline. First, he made out the driver's seat ahead, empty, but in the back, Gregory felt a constriction in his throat. In the back seat, slumped sideways, lay a woman. Her hair covered her face. Her arm was twisted unnaturally. She wasn't moving. His mother, he realized, Ian's mommy. Carefully, trying not to cut himself on the shards, Gregory reached in and touched her neck, checking for a pulse. Her skin was icy. No pulse. Rigor mortis had set in. It seemed death had occurred at least 12 hours ago, if not longer. He closed his eyes for a moment. Too late? But what about the father? He walked around the mangled car. Nearby lay an ejected child's car seat, empty. A child's toy, a plush teddy bear, its paw torn off. A scene of disaster. To the side, by a tree, something caught his attention. A man lay half covered by fern fronds, as if they had been thrown over him. Gregory approached. A man, early 30s, in a blood-soaked jacket. His eyes closed, his face remarkably serene, as if asleep. But from the state of the body, it was immediately clear. He was dead. Branches were scattered around. He had evidently regained consciousness before dying, tried to get out, and had crawled a little, perhaps wanted to climb up to the road, but succumbed to his injuries. Or a faint hope flickered. Had someone moved him? Gregory checked the carotid artery of the man. Nothing. Nothing more could be done. He sighed heavily. Sad and bitter. Still young. They raised a child. And now, in an instant, everything was shattered. Looking up the slope, he saw Ian above. The boy hadn't waited and was now coming down after him, clutching at bushes. "Ian, don't!" Gregory began, but it was too late. The child was already next to the overturned car. He looked inside, saw his mother. "Mommy!" He shrieked thinly and rushed towards the crumpled door. Gregory caught the boy in his arms, preventing him from cutting himself on the sharp edges of the metal. Ian thrashed in his arms, screaming and crying, "Let me go! Mommy! Mommy, wake up!" He struggled so violently that Gregory could barely hold him. In his despair, the boy seemed not to recognize anything around him, only calling for his mother, as if she could awaken. Gregory moved further away from the car, holding the screaming child tightly, swaying him as best he could, trying to calm him. But how could grief subside immediately? "Mommy, Mommy," Ian choked, sobbing. He was just repeating the word now, knowing his mommy wouldn't hear. Gregory sank to his knees right there in the grass and hugged the boy tightly. He let him cry, let him scream, not trying to stop the tears. He himself cried too, quietly, burying his chin in the child's soft, light hair. The tears flowed naturally, and he had no strength to hold them back. "Mommy?" the little one whimpered, his voice hoarse from crying. "I'm here. I'm with you," Gregory whispered, swaying him gently in his arms. "Hold on, little one, hold on." He repeated the affectionate words he used to say to Tim when he fell and bumped his head. Then it helped. But now the boy had a bump on his heart, and a senseless accident was to blame. Gregory looked up at the gray, desolate sky. A silent scream was in his throat. Why? Why did you take this child's mother and father? Wasn't my pain enough? The only answer was the rustling of the wind. It's unclear how much time passed. Ian shuddered in his arms, his sobs growing quieter. Finally, the boy buried his nose in Gregory's chest and fell silent, only breathing heavily. The little one was exhausted. Gregory felt drained. A lump was in his throat. But he had to continue. Think of the living child. He carefully nudged Ian away, looked at his face. His eyes were swollen, his cheeks wet with dirt and tears. The boy stared as if into nothingness, with unfocused eyes trembling faintly all over. "Ian, little one, I'm so sorry," Gregory said hoarsely. "Your mom and dad, they're in heaven now." The boy didn't answer, only clutched the fabric of Gregory's jacket even tighter with his little fingers. It seemed he was afraid to let Gregory go for a moment, lest he'd disappear too. Gregory stood up, holding Ian in his arms, and went to the spot where the boy's father lay. So the child wouldn't see, he turned Ian's face towards himself. The boy didn't even try to look around, as if withdrawn into himself by grief. No time to linger. The deceased needed to be buried properly as much as possible. In the back seat of the car, Gregory found a small backpack, evidently with belongings. In it, he discovered a folding and trenching tool. It would do. He found a suitable spot under a large birch tree. He sat down, placing Ian beside him, so the boy wouldn't look at the bodies. "I need to do something very important," he said softly, wiping the child's dirty cheeks with his sleeve. "Try to be patient for a little while, okay? I'm right here, nearby. I'll just do something and be right back, all right?" Ian barely audibly replied, "Don't go." "I won't go far. I'm right here." Gregory pointed nearby. "You can sit and look at your backpack. Your toy's in there, isn't it? Sit and play for a bit. I'll be quick." He took a small toy car from Ian's backpack, which he had picked up from his scattered belongings in the clearing. The boy mechanically took it, but didn't play, just clenched it in his fist. However, he allowed Gregory to move a couple of steps away. Gregory unfolded the shovel and began the arduous task. The ground was moist and soft after the rains. It dug tolerably. The physical labor somewhat distracted him from the emotional pain. The forest around remained silent, as if it too mourned. An hour later, a shallow grave under the birch tree was ready. It would be enough to protect the bodies from animals, at least temporarily. Better than nothing. Gregory first moved the man's body. He struggled to lower him into the pit, trying not to look at the frozen face. Then he went to the car for the woman. Carefully, slowly, he extracted her from the crumpled seat. She was fragile and surprisingly light. Her reddish hair spilled over her shoulders. Her face, beneath layers of dust, looked as if she was sleeping. Gregory swallowed the lump that rose in his throat. He carried her to the birch in his arms, just as he had carried Ian earlier that night. He laid her beside her husband. He touched the woman's cold, folded hands. "I'm sorry. I was too late." He imagined, or perhaps a breeze truly stirred, and the birch rustled its branches as if answering. Gregory climbed out of the grave and began to quickly cover it. Clay plopped onto the clothes of the deceased, concealing them forever. Each shovelful of earth resonated with a heavy heart. Finally, it was done. He smoothed the soil with the shovel, then placed 2 branches crosswise on top. There was nothing more he could do. Standing over the fresh mound, he whispered barely audibly, "May the earth rest lightly on you." He wasn't particularly religious, but now he wanted to believe that their souls had indeed ascended to a place where there was no pain. Suppressing another surge of emotions, Gregory turned around. Ian was sitting right where he had been left, staring at him. Such meaningless sorrow was on the child's face that Gregory's heart broke. He returned, knelt beside him, and without a word, hugged the boy again. The boy pressed his face tightly against Gregory's chest, silent. He had no strength left to cry. They sat like that for several minutes, a man and an orphaned child, 2 souls in the middle of a wild forest beside a makeshift grave. Finally, Gregory quietly said, "We need to go now, Ian." The child nodded almost imperceptibly, clinging to him. "Can you walk? If not, I'll carry you." "I can," the boy whispered. His voice was faint but resolute. Gregory helped him stand. He stood up himself, feeling aches throughout his body from digging in old wounds that flared. But that was nothing. He handed Ian his backpack and the toy car, which the boy had dropped. The boy put the toy back in the backpack, as if it had now become too heavy a reminder. Then, unexpectedly, he extended his hand. Gregory understood. He was looking for his hand. He responded with a warm, firm clasp. "Let's go. Together." They left the mournful spot and climbed back onto the logging track. Gregory decided to continue along it. Ideally, the track should lead to a larger road, 10 or 15 miles away. Perhaps they would meet people or hitch a ride there. They needed to cover as much ground as possible before evening, but Ian, still in shock, could barely move his legs. After a couple of miles, the boy began to stumble on seemingly flat ground. He would have cried if he had the strength, but he had cried himself out. He only silently opened his mouth from exhaustion. Gregory picked him up without a second thought. The boy didn't resist, burying his nose in Gregory's neck. "Sleep for a bit, little hero," Gregory mumbled. "I'll carry you." The boy didn't answer, only wrapped his arms around Gregory's neck. His eyes closed almost immediately. A light drizzle began to fall, first sparse, then heavier. Gregory pulled up his hood, shielding the child from the drops. His feet sank into the soggy ground. Walking became harder, but he stubbornly pressed on, trying not to think about the throbbing pain in his back and arms from the burden. This continued until the gray dusk began to thicken between the trees. Gregory realized he had no more strength for the day, and there was no point in walking at night. Again, the wolves, and it was easy to get lost. He needed to find a place to spend the night, preferably dry and safe. Along the logging track, there were almost no places to camp. only swampy lowlands and fallen trees on either side. Fortunately, he stumbled upon a semi-abandoned logging cabin. Apparently, crews had once cut timber here and left behind a watchman's shack. The cabin stood off to the side, under the spruces, almost hidden. The roof was warped, but the walls were sturdy. The door was ajar. Gregory peered inside, empty, damp, and smelling of mold, but the roof held. It would do to get out of the rain. He carried Ian, who had woken with the movement inside, and sat him on an overturned crate. He rummaged in the twilight, found an old fire pit. He lit a small fire right in the roughly built stone hearth. Thankfully, he had gathered firewood along the way. The light illuminated their temporary shelter, walls of darkened logs, gaps, but tolerable. Ian sat silently, barely uttering a word all evening after that scene. He just stared blankly into the fire. Gregory understood. The boy was in shock. The main thing now was to warm him, feed him, and let him sleep. He took a chocolate bar from his backpack, broke it. "Here, have a piece," he offered to the child. Ian shook his head. "I don't want any." "You've been walking all day. You must be hungry." "I don't want any," the boy repeated stubbornly. Gregory didn't insist. He placed the bar nearby. "If you want some, it's here." He took a small bite himself, for appearance's sake. He had no appetite either, but he needed to keep up his strength. The silence was oppressive. Outside, the rain tapped on the roof. The fire crackled, casting dancing shadows. Gregory sat next to the boy, leaning his back against the log wall. For some time, they just sat, gazing into the fire. Then Ian quietly asked, looking into the flames, "You cried too?" Gregory blinked in surprise. The boy noticed his tears. "I did," he admitted. "You know, because I feel so sorry for your mom and dad, too." Ian nodded. He was silent for a moment, then asked, even more quietly, "And you lost someone, too?" Gregory tensed. He hadn't expected such a question. He remained silent for a long time, but the small gaze was fixed on him, waiting for an answer. Resin crackled on a log in the hearth. "Yes," Gregory finally choked out. "I lost someone, too." "Who?" The quiet child's voice uttered the terrible question, and Gregory's heart felt as if it had been pierced. He closed his eyes. He had to answer, and he did, very softly. "My son, and my wife." Ian stirred, moving closer. The flames reflected in his eyes, and tears glistened on his cheeks again, but they were quiet now, almost understanding. "Did they die?" Gregory nodded almost imperceptibly. The words were stuck. But perhaps this was the moment to say them, to let go. "We were in an accident," he whispered. "5 years ago, in the woods. The car went into the river. He swallowed. "They drowned. But I didn't." He fell silent, staring at the floor. He felt the boy's intense gaze on him. "And you were left alone," Ian concluded quietly. "Alone," Gregory echoed. Everything inside him clenched, just like then by the cold water, when he pulled his lifeless son onto the bank. Like on the day of the funeral. Like every winter and summer, he had lived locked away with this pain. He covered his face with his hand. He didn't want to cry again in front of the child, but his shoulders trembled slightly, and then he felt a small hand on his back. A timid stroke, just as he himself had stroked the boy, trying to comfort him. "Don't cry," Ian whispered. "You're with me now. We're together." These simple words seemed to shatter some block inside Gregory. He lowered his hand and looked at the child. Ian was kneeling beside him, tears streaming down his cheeks. Yet he was trying to comfort Gregory, the adult. Gregory smiled faintly through his tears. He gently hugged the boy and pulled him close. "Yes, we're together, Ian," he whispered. "Thank you." He gently kissed the top of his head. The boy wrapped his arms around his neck, and they sat there embracing until the fire died down and only hot embers remained. At some point, Ian fell asleep in his arms. Gregory barely noticed. He seemed to have fallen into a strange oblivion himself, where grief and solace intertwined into a single intoxicating feeling. Coming to his senses, he gently placed the sleeping child on his cloak, using it as a blanket. He leaned his back against the wall nearby, pulling up his hood. The rain was still tapping, but it was fading. That night, for the first time in a long time, he didn't have nightmares. In his semi-sleep, strange images appeared. He was walking through the forest after a small silhouette. At first he thought it was Tim, called out to him, but it turned out to be Ian, smiling and waving as if to say, "Follow me." He followed, and suddenly bright sunlight broke through the trees. A sharp metallic clang woke him at dawn. Gregory instantly sprang up, shielding the boy. There was a clear commotion outside the cabin, as if metal had struck a tree. Then voices. People. Gregory motioned for the boy to sit quietly. He tiptoed to a crack in the wall and peeked out. Through the trees, dawn light dappled the logging track, and in that gray twilight he discerned human figures. 3 of them in orange vests with walkie-talkies. One had a rifle on his shoulder, another a machete. The third swept a flashlight through the bushes. Nearby on the track, an ATV was visible. They had apparently arrived on it and were sweeping the forest. "Hey!" one of the men called out softly, adjusting his cap. "Anyone alive out there? Speak up!" Gregory breathed a sigh of relief. These were rescuers or volunteer rangers, clearly looking for survivors after the accident. He pushed open the door of the half-ruined cabin and stepped onto the threshold, raising his hand. "We're here." The men instantly tensed, turning their heads. Seeing the man with raised hands, they shouted, "Stay where you are, we're coming to you." Soon the 3 were hurrying towards the cabin. The stocky man with the bushy beard approached closest. "Who are you?" "I rescued a child who was wandering in the woods last night," Gregory explained quickly. "Found him about a mile from here, took him back to my cabin. Then we went looking for his parents yesterday." The bearded man nodded understandingly. "We found the car. We realized that the parents—" He broke off, looking at Gregory. "There's a fresh grave there. Did you bury them?" Gregory nodded. "I did, to keep the animals away." The rescuer lowered his eyes for a moment. "Thank you. We've been looking for them since the day before yesterday. Relatives raised the alarm when they didn't arrive. There's a steep drop off the logging track there. Did you see it?" "They flew down," the man gestured. "We were there yesterday, found the bodies, but couldn't find the boy. We thought maybe he survived and walked off. We started searching the forest. We noticed from tracks that someone picked him up. Adult male footprints next to children's. We thought maybe a fellow traveler or a park ranger." Just then, Ian appeared in the doorway, drawn by the voices. Seeing the unfamiliar men, he got scared and pressed himself against the doorframe. Gregory turned. "It's all right, Ian. Come here." He held out his hand. The boy shyly approached and took it, hiding slightly behind him. The rescuers smiled, seeing the child alive. "Well, hello there, big guy," the bearded man said softly. We've been looking for you. You gave us quite a scare." Ian didn't reply, only clutched Gregory's hand even tighter. "My name is Peter," the rescuer introduced himself. "And you?" "Gregory," he replied curtly. "Very nice to meet you, Gregory." "Thank you. You could say you played a hero. Not everyone would rush to save a child like that." Gregory merely shrugged. Inside, he felt embarrassed. He had done what he had to, not for praise. "Let's get you two out of here," another rescuer, a slender young man, chimed in. "We've set up a camp not far from here. A helicopter should be arriving." "A helicopter?" Ian repeated quietly. "Yes, a small one, to take you to the hospital to get checked out," Peter explained. "How are you doing, Ian, all right?" The boy shyly nodded. "He's tired and scared," Gregory said. "No visible injuries, but a checkup wouldn't hurt." "Of course," Peter agreed. "We'll check you out, too. How are you yourself, healthy?" "Fine," Gregory lied. In truth, his back was burning, and his head throbbed after a sleepless night. But all that was trivial. "Well, that's great. Then let's get ready and go." The rescuers quickly extinguished their fire in the cabin lest it spread, and helped Gregory pack his belongings. He slung his backpack onto his back, took Ian in his arms for reassurance. The boy clung to him, refusing to go to strangers. The four of them moved towards the ATV. One of the rescuers sat at the wheel, another in the back. Peter gestured for Gregory to sit sideways in front of him, holding the child. Ian was scared of the roaring machine and buried his face in Gregory's chest. Gregory stroked his back. "It's nothing. We'll just ride a little way." They started the engine and drove slowly, avoiding bumps. Ian didn't detach himself from Gregory the entire ride. About 20 minutes later, the edge of the forest appeared, and a makeshift camp, a couple of tents, an open-backed utility vehicle, several people by a fire. Hearing the sound of the engine, figures rose to meet them. The ATV stopped. Gregory dismounted, holding the boy. Then an elderly woman in a headscarf rushed over, her face anxious. "Ian! Ian, my precious!" Grandmother? Yes, probably his grandmother. Apparently the parents were going to her, or she had come to participate in the search. The woman burst into tears, extending her arms. Ian, seeing the familiar face, quietly said, "Grandma." His voice trembled. Gregory felt him stir hesitantly in his arms, his gaze darting. Was it joy, or had he remembered new sorrow? "Ian, my darling boy." His grandmother had already reached them and carefully took the boy from Gregory's arms. He didn't resist, allowing himself to be transferred, though he still clung to Gregory's jacket with one small hand. "Grandma," he breathed out and pressed himself against the old woman, crying again. There, I'm here," she wailed, stroking her grandson. "Alive, oh, thank goodness." Gregory stepped back, feeling his throat constrict at the scene. He turned away, giving them space. The joy of meeting a loved one, something he himself would always lack. But he was happy for the boy, not alone in the world. His grandmother, cradling Ian, suddenly looked up at Gregory. "Was it you? Who saved him?" It was," Peter confirmed, approaching. "A real hero." "Thank you." The old woman's voice trembled. "Thank you, kind sir. It's amazing. God sent him." Gregory merely nodded, unable to find words. Doctors came, beginning to examine the child right in his grandmother's arms. The boy was conscious, answering softly. A medic shone a flashlight, checking pupil reaction, feeling his ribs. "Looks like no serious injuries. Slight hypothermia, exhaustion. We'll stabilize him, the doctor concluded. And the adult? Thank you, not necessary. Gregory waved him off, but the doctor was unyielding. Everyone needs a checkup. You could also be cold or injured. Gregory reluctantly allowed them to check his blood pressure, examine his scrapes, all trivial compared to what could have been. Meanwhile, the promised helicopter arrived. Its monotonous hum grew stronger. 5 minutes later, a small rescue helicopter landed on the improvised pad, stirring up a whirlwind of leaves. The boy, along with his grandmother and the doctor, was invited inside. Gregory remained standing outside, shielding his face from the rotor-wash. He understood. They were about to take them away. His role, perhaps, was over. Ian would go with his grandmother to the hospital, then to the city. And him? He glanced towards the wilderness. His lonely cabin was still there among the trees. Just yesterday, he thought he would die there alone. But now, everything had changed. "Gregory!" Peter called out, shouting over the noise of the rotors. "Come with us. You need to get back to people, too, and the boy's attached to you, see?" He did see. Ian, sitting inside the helicopter on his grandmother's lap, turned his head, looking for him. Their eyes met through the transparent window. The boy pressed his little hand against the glass, as if beckoning. Gregory stepped forward. Doubts warred within him. He had hidden from everyone for so many years, unwilling to return to anything. But now, could he live among people again? And should he? He lowered his gaze to his hands. In his fingers, he still clutched something, a plush teddy bear with a torn paw. The very one he had found by the car. He must have picked it up automatically when they were gathering things. Gregory looked at the teddy bear's funny little face, then at Ian in the helicopter. The boy began to cry again, seeing that Uncle Greg wasn't by his side. Without another thought, Gregory climbed into the helicopter cabin. He sat next to the grandmother and the child. Ian immediately released his grandmother's sweater and reached for him. Gregory smiled, offering the plush toy. "Looks like this is your teddy bear. He was waiting for you." Ian's eyes widened. "Teddy?" He carefully took the bear, pressed it to himself. "Thank you." Then, with his other hand, he again grabbed Gregory's sleeve, clutching tightly. "Are you staying with us?" he asked plaintively. Gregory put his arm around his shoulders. "Of course, I'm not going anywhere." His grandmother quietly wept, watching them. She seemed to understand everything about this strange, grim man who had become salvation for her grandson. The helicopter shuddered, lifting from the ground. The roar of the engine grew louder. Ian instinctively pressed against Gregory in fear, but Gregory gently stroked his back, soothing him. Through the window opened an endless panorama of the wilderness, a green sea of forests, crisscrossed by ribbons of rivers and mirrors of lakes, stretched to the horizon. The first rays of sun pierced the clouds, gilding the treetops. Gregory looked down, where his cabin remained, Ian's parents' grave, all the fears and sorrows of the past few days. There, deep beneath that canopy, remained another grave, that of his own family. He felt as though something heavy was lifting with the morning light, as if his soul was being released. He took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, he felt light. Sad, yes. The pain of loss would never disappear, but beside him a living boy snored softly, pressed against him with his whole body. And that warmth, that trust, it patched the huge hole that had torn Gregory apart for so long. He gently kissed the top of Ian's head. The boy was already nodding off. Exhaustion and relief had taken their toll. Gregory looked up at the clearing sky. The sun was emerging from behind the clouds. A new day had begun. Somewhere out there in the boundless sky, he imagined two beloved souls watching. He didn't know if it was real, but he wanted to believe that they saw him now and were smiling. A quiet smile touched his lips. "We made it," he whispered barely audibly, without clarifying to whom he was speaking, whether to the sleeping Ian or to those invisible ones. "Thank you." The wind carried the helicopter further east, towards people, towards a new life. Below, the boundless wilderness slowly drifted by, illuminated by the clear morning light. Gregory gazed down at the sleeping boy in his arms, then looked ahead again, towards where the morning wind was carrying them. The future was unknown, but now, in this shining sky, he saw a ray of hope. Thank you for watching. What do you think of this story? Please share your thoughts. Your comments are very valuable to us.